what I'm going to be talking to you about is one of the oldest professions and one of the ones that has learned a great many lessons about what I would call usability. And I hope that as a result of what I'm going to do tonight, that you may have somewhat of an idea, one, about the way buildings work, and also maybe some thoughts about what may be in your future as people concerned with usability issues as the computer in particularly becomes more and more essential to the operation of buildings. And I think you'll see that it's not always easy. Just to repeat a little bit of what the introduction said, I was trained first as an engineer, then I became an architect and started a firm and was in the business for 9 years, essentially designing HMOs when they designed central facilities, and also we did a lot of bank work and work for the agent. And all of those are issues where I can assure you that usability matters a whole lot. Then in 1988, I joined Drexel because they were starting an architectural engineering program, and I was asked to first teach design and then run it, and that's what I've been doing ever since. And as it says down at the very bottom there, at home I play with the web and have lots of good fun. So what we're going to do first is do a little tour of Drexel University. And what I'm going to do with you is ask you first to look at this tour, and I'm not going to tell you things, but I'm going to ask you as we go through it, what does this have to do with usability? Then we're going to come back and look at some of the issues, and I'm going to tell you what I think it has to do with usability. So there's Drexel from two days ago. Hopefully, if I put it up for today, we would have seen National Usability Day, but I don't know, or World Usability Day. And we're going to start with this building, which I understand was the site of this event a year ago. How many of you were there? Good many of you. Brand new building, right? Remember, we're thinking about usability. I should tell you that if you walk down Market Street, you can't get in that building. That's looking back towards that same lobby. Now, we're in an older building now. We have switched to an older building, but this is a new cabinet. We're now in my office. Familiar, nobody's laughing. My desk, ergonomic, right? Look at those. That's right next to where we just had the picture. That's the valve for the thermostat in my room. And this is the 1893 building, which is still wonderful. So there we are at that same 1893 building, designed, by the way, as a really radical building by the architects of the Reading Terminal in Philadelphia, the Wilson brothers. Really splendid building. So what did you see in this building? What did people, on my little tour, what did you see? Yeah. Not only that, but it doesn't go anywhere. What else? No signage. There's a little bit, but it's not very good. What else? Right, and just remember that this is a marked improvement over the environment I had for the prior 8 years. Who knows why I have the sticky on the airbag? To see if there's anything, so when I call to complain, I can tell them it's not fluttering. Anything else anybody saw? In department stores, it's intentional.
It's all a bulletin board with 1,000 pieces of paper on it.
Yep. Yeah, I saw a hand back there.
I know from personal experience that if you take the loan officer, you're completely more.
How many other people here are Drexel people? Ah, that's good. So, you know, I'm biting the hand that feeds me, I'll say. But I figure if I can't critique what I do, how in the world can I say the rest of it has got to be better? So, if anybody knows hockey, play it down. Hockey's my president. What I had in mind, some issues of building usability. Pay cob free. Anybody know what else they designed? Bank of China, the National Gallery, the Louvre, Society Hill Towers, big guns. So by big guns, they ought to do it right. Yes? No? So this stair is a lovely idea from Market Street. And this is a classic case of something we'll talk more about later, in which somebody has a great idea, but they haven't talked to the other people who are going to be responsible for it. So this was a great idea. You walk up here, there's a plaza up here, you go in those doors right there, and you're in at the second or third level, and you have the entrance to a wonderful big atrium. The only problem is they didn't talk to security or maintenance. It's never open, and it doesn't work. And the plaza's empty. So something's wrong. The entrance. Now, I discovered a double thing about this. I've walked down Market many times, tried to go in that door, and I can't. However, it turns out you can. There's a little plaque next to the door now that if I wave my Drexel card, it will open the door so I can get in. But do they tell me that that will happen? No, I have to call security and they have to do it. There is no way of communicating to me that, hey, you can actually get in this door, that most of the time I assumed I couldn't. This. Why have we got this? We have an architect with a great idea, a triangular shape. That's what Pay is known for, triangular shapes, National Gallery, and so on. Only it's got a little problem. They realized, I'm not sure how far along in construction, that that was really dangerous, and that people were going to walk into it and sue Drexel. Not a good idea. Now, this is grand when you come in, but what the heck picture from Market Street. And it is a pretty picture. However, let's see, 4 days from now, I'll be in that space making a pitch to next year's crop of students. Unless I talk really loud like this, they can't hear me because the acoustics in there are god-awful. It's not intended to be used for anything other than a photograph. Is that a really good use? Probably that space is worth, $200,000 to $300,000. Then we have one of my favorites. We see this all the time. This grand space that has been meticulously worked out. ACOB 3, and I talked to the Drexel people to ensure that I was right about this. They knew where every single brick and every single joint in that building was going to be so that it would look good. And then what do we put inside it? The trash cans that nobody made provision for. Now, is that dangerous? No. Is it stupid? You decide. You probably read recently about the issues down at the link about the stair that swayed. Well, we had, I'm told, I wasn't in on this, so I have to be a little careful in the way I say it, but I believe that this rod right here was not intended by the architects because they built it and it swayed, and so they came back because it would not have been usable. Or how about this lovely? This is, after we come out of the new building on the way to my office, this is a fire cabinet. And we put the valve in the way upper left. Why? Oh, because we're going to have a hose on it that fills the rest of the cabinet. But we don't have a hose. Somebody didn't think this one through. And if I'm the fireman, that is a heck of a position to have to try and attach a hose in the 30 seconds or so I want to spend doing it. Too hot. These, you can't quite read it, that's the departmental offices. What we have here is something you find in older buildings all of the time, which is something that was good originally. Curtis 261 identified that office. We don't think about what happens over time, and it just accumulates. And so we now have signs there, and there, and there, and here, and here, and here, many of which apply to departments that were in those spaces 3 moves before. So you have to know which sign is current in order to get where you want to go. Yeah, this was correctly identified. I have in my office, I have had, how many people here have offices that are comfortable year-round? 1! Wow! You must be the boss. How many people are cold in the summertime? Did everybody see how many hands went up? Good half of them. How many of you are too hot in the winter? Not quite as many, but a good many of you. Now, if you took one of the courses that we teach, I could go into all the physiology and why you can't satisfy everybody, but that's not what's going on here. That's because we don't know how to design HVAC systems that do it right, and we don't know how to train people who operate them to run it right, et cetera, et cetera. So indeed, we've already talked about that. These are the unsightly sweaters that warm me up, because this, which is the control valve, the only control valve I have, is, if you will notice, there is about 1/4 of an inch play between that face, which is flush with this piece of very rough metal, And the difference between all the way on and all the way off is those two black marks. And when I call, they say, oh, you again. So, I don't know when you can read this, but those were all mine from my institution, but I'm sure that you have enjoyed similar things. This one points out that this is a mop sink. Guys, what do you think happens that caused that sign to exist? This happens all the time. So what are your pet peeves about buildings? Who's got a pet peeve about buildings? I can't believe that you don't get it. Fluorescent lighting, why? Right. Could it be better? Could fluorescent lighting be better? Absolutely. For one thing, they could probably pay $2.50 instead of $1.50 for, I'm not current on my lamp prices anymore, but what happens? They put in, talk about a classic design thing. If I'm an architect, I design, well, let's take this room. How many different light fixtures are there in this room? And lamp types. In one of the Drexel buildings, I was talking to the facilities people, the architects put in, I think it was 34 different lamp types. Why? Because they wanted to get it right. Well, what does that mean for the maintenance people? What do? They get rid of all of the ones that are difficult, and we get the result. Now, there's also the refresh rate, which is inherent to fluorescence, because we're at 60 cycles, and that's just wrong, and you're probably one of the unfortunate ones for whom 60 is just bad. So you need a totally different type of light. What happens when you, and I'm talking about you as I think most of you are web people. I may be wrong. Am I right or wrong about what you are as a group? Are you web interface designers, or are you more than that? Right. Now, if I'm working for the Pentagon and the latest version of the fighter is heads-up display and I get that wrong, I may blow up downtown Baghdad. But for most of us, and I think of myself as a web designer in a crude way, frustration is the answer when we get it wrong. And that tends to lose to money. What happens in buildings? Oh, we kill people. Or we maim them. And we frustrate. This is the Hyatt Regency Hotel, 1981. 114 people died because a walkway parallel with this one fell down on the floor in a big celebration. And what happened? The contractor, during the course of the construction process, proposed for his convenience, usability, that he switched from this design to this design. And the engineer looking at it said, sure. Just as good. The only problem is you just increased the stress thing that makes things collapse in that element by a factor of 2, and that's what happened during that event. And so 114 people died, 200 injured. Happens, unfortunately, all too often. Or how about this? How many of you have been in buildings where the fire exit is padlocked? 1, 2, 3, 4, and probably the rest of you have and didn't notice it. We kill people all the time. Because why is that done? They're not trying to kill people. What's going on here? The problem in buildings is, and I think you're likely to see this more and more, which is why I bring it up, we've got multiple audiences that we're satisfying. And the people who padlock the doors are the ones who know they're going to lose admissions money or what have you. And they're doing their job. They're making it a better facility for their purpose. So what's different about buildings? There are many simultaneous users doing different, unpredictable, in detail, things. My experience in websites is you can control the user experience a lot more than you can in buildings. And yet, as you go to the more inclusive 3D universe that we're headed for in the computer world, more immersive is one way of saying it, you're going to be in the same boat. There are many different user types. Again, on most websites, my experience is, yeah, you have different users, but you got a whole lot more all the way from the kid in the stroller to the folks in a walker and everything in between that you got to satisfy simultaneously, or at least not kill. You've got a lot more senses involved. Right now, the human-computer interface is a little bit tactile, mostly visual, and audio to some extent. Well, in buildings, it's everything, including smell. And motion. There's motion all over the place. And of course, we're dealing in long time spans. What's the life of a website? What is the average life of a website these days? A year and a half? If you're lucky. Well, we're still using, literally, buildings that are 1,000 years old. Actually, a couple thousand years. Anybody been to the Pantheon in Rome? A couple thousand years old, they're still using it. What I pointed out here, am I okay on time? Am I doing all right? Stakeholders. There are a lot of different people. Of the people who build it, there are owners, architects, engineers, contractors, all of whom, we call them stakeholders, have their own interests and their own needs for usability. Then there are the people who operate it. Maintenance, security, emergency housekeeping. Each of them has their own definition of usability, and it's all in the same space. And then there's the government who has their concerns. Gosh, did anybody get left out? Oh, they usually come last. One of the reasons that the prior speaker, Mr. Rosenblum, was so successful is he remembered that this is the person who interacts with the customer. And we tend to forget that. So, how do we strive for usability? Well, for one thing, we have a lot of standards. This is a $450 book that I have in my office that I lend to my students overnight. This is one I got for free for, I don't know, doing something for some publisher. That are full. That Architectural Graphic Standards is 500, 600 pages of a right way to do X, Y, and Z. That is how we do it. We have codes, all kinds of codes that tell us how to do things. And those are codes that if you get it wrong, somebody can sue you. And we have standards, which are like codes, and in fact, many times incorporated in the codes. And you better do those right, because it's probably not going to work right. And by the way, the standards I'm talking about, if I were designing a healthcare, it would probably fill the hard copy versions, would probably fill a bookcase, oh, as wide as this open space, right up to the ceiling. And if I get any one of them wrong, they consume it. So we have this, just to give you an example of the kind of standards we're dealing with. This is what it takes to do a toilet properly. And when I was in the design business, I had my firm, when these came into play, and my goodness, was there a lot of worry about that. That was a real change in the world. Just putting into place, having enough room for a wheelchair, which you think would be obvious. Wasn't it? And then we have, and it wouldn't totally surprise me if you were facing this in the future at some point, licensing. Now, what is licensing? What's the good part of being licensed as an architect? I got a monopoly. You cannot take your drawings to Harrisburg and get them to seal them and let you build it. You've got to come to one of us. What's the downside? You can sue me if I get it wrong. And everybody does. There's a lot of steps. Education, internship, exams, and it's a long process, and it's really important. This is the exam. Anybody know anybody who's taken the architectural registration exam? You know what you have to do? You go into, I went into the Valley Forge Convention Center when I did it. No, it wasn't Valley Forge, it was down the road. It was Fort Washington. At 7 a.m. in the morning, I was given the information for building, said, here, design a building, and 12 hours later, I had to walk out with a complete design of a building that had to meet these codes I was just talking about. I failed it the first time. I sure didn't fail it the second time. So what affects usability in building? The stakeholders' different interests, money. Money matters a whole lot, as you well know. And it matters just as much in buildings because the sums are enormous. There is big, big bucks. Knowledge. There is a whole lot of lack of knowledge about certain things. Let me give you an example. Ladies, how many of you go to, let's call it, theater? In my case, it's Verizon Hall downtown. How many women have been to Verizon Hall? What's wrong with Verizon Hall that a woman cares about? Bathrobes, right. What happens in most buildings? Right. Women take probably, there is studies that will tell me this exactly, at least 50% longer to use a bathroom. But what do? We give them the same or fewer stalls, and therefore they don't function. I have a friend who will not go to Verizon Hall because she cannot get into the bathroom and out during intermission. Legal fear. Architects and engineers live in fear of being sued. An awful lot of defensive maneuver and dumb things being done because you're afraid of getting sued. And time. Always time, because it's really equals money for the people who are designing and building it, which isn't necessarily what you care about as users. And just as an aside, I started with the new building with the Sohn Center because that's where you expect to get it right. But in the older buildings, it gets even worse because you got to deal with everything that's there, and that's what most of this country is older buildings. Are there connections between our fields? I think so, that we use computers throughout design, and more so, we're increasingly using them to operate buildings. I taught a course called Intelligent Buildings last spring. And I argue that our concerns about safety are probably going to be increasingly yours as you move into these related areas. Are they identical? No. The downside is the architects and engineers work in a more complex, I argue, I'm sure there are some who disagree, domain because of the number of stakeholders and the number of senses and motion and so on. That's a wonderful topic to argue. Are there lessons? Yeah. Standards and codes, different kinds of people. I'm sure you know that. The analytic versus the visual creators and the need for both of them. What our field has found is the big changes come from disasters. Every major change in a code comes because somebody died. And that's probably, hopefully not as dramatic a kind of thing that is going to happen to you. And I argue, don't forget people. That's what Mr. Rosenbluth did. Successful, remembered them. And he's a big success. And just to remember that there are wonderful buildings out there that have been in operation. This is La Cathedral, where I was 2 summers ago, which is, it's cold in the winter, it's cold in the summer. There's a lot of waste space up in the top. The lighting isn't very good for reading. You really can't hear the pastor unless he's got electronic amplification. And you know what? It's still a wonderful building. So it's not as simple as I said. Questions? Yes, sir. The question is, have I noticed difficulties with libraries? Oh, you bet. Libraries are in an enormous period of transition right now because they don't know what their users want. They are trying to figure out what their users want. They're trying to figure out, are they really a Starbucks with a couple of magazines, or are they the repositories of the culture? And they're not quite sure. And every librarian is trying to deal with it. And I can pick any building you can name and show you problems with it. And libraries are one where there's enormous transitions. Another question. Yes, sir.
I'm curious about industrial design and certainly the software world. Both kind of take it as a given that usability professionals will be part of the team, at least that's increasingly the case. It doesn't seem so much in architecture. Am I right about that? And if so, why? And if I'm not right, I'm curious about that. What is that category of person? Are there social scientists working closely with architects?
The question was if there are indeed usability experts working with architects. The quick and dirty answer is architects are sort of like doctors. We are issued a license that proves that we know everything once we have passed that exam. And so the answer is most architects believe that they know better than anybody could tell them. They're wrong, but that's what they think. There are some professionals. There is a psychology of spaces subdiscipline, which is read in academic circles, but not by practicing architects. There are people called programmers. If anybody here been involved in the design of a building and dealt with an architectural programmer? Well, architectural programmer is a phrase, goes way back before computers. They are the people who decide how does a building go together. They are the people who list all of the spaces, all of the relationships, how are people supposed to use it, I'm working with my students right now, they're doing programs for a variety of different buildings. They have to decide what are the floor loads, what are the plumbing loads, do the women get 50% more toilets, all of that sort of thing. A good programmer is extremely aware of these issues and should help. But guess what happens in most building designs? programmer's involved up front, hands it to the architect, and leaves, and nobody checks that it's done right. It is a very rare building where usability is a concern all the way through.
In architecture, do you guys have something similar equivalent to user testing? I mean, in the software world, things are very malleable. You can change the style sheet, but obviously once you build the building, it's not very malleable. So what types of user testing can you do?
Their prototypes are being
set in stone.
The question was, is there testing of the finished product? To which the cynical answer is no. One of the issues that I mentioned is that architects, engineers are really concerned about legal issues. So, what would you think would exist? Wouldn't you think there would be a place where you could go and find all of the things that worked and didn't work, particularly the things that didn't work? Nope, can't find it. Why? Because the insurance companies lock it up. And so there have been repeated proposals for a repository of building failures. And it never goes anywhere because nobody wants to admit that they did something wrong because they're afraid they're going to get sued. And so, now, just to, I'm cynical, those books I showed, Architectural Graphic Standards, those represent the accumulated wisdom of currently, I guess, that's about 125 years of design. So there are certain things. For instance, how many of you think about climbing a stair? What is it about climbing a stair you ought to think about? How sensitive, forget about the rocket, how sensitive is the human pace to a quarter-inch difference in the tread height? Very. And in fact, that's the kind of thing that we have learned over the years. And we take very seriously, and so you very rarely find a new stair in which you don't have a constant tread height because people fall down and hurt themselves badly if you don't. And there are many things of that ilk. So mostly light switches are in the right place these days. How many people generally find light switches where you expect them? How many people have gone to Europe and found, oh my God, I don't know where the light switch is? Which doesn't mean they're worse, it just means they're different. In the back.
Is there anything that realistically done for a building like City Hall, which is totally chopped up inside, furniture terrible, and costs no money? 500 window air.
Are we talking about Philadelphia City Hall?
Yes.
Is there anything that can be done with, I'll start with the easy one. Is there anything that can be done with no money to fix a building that's in bad shape? The answer is very little. With imagination, there are things that can be done. But there are a whole lot of things that just plain take money. What we have in architecture is really like a forest that has grown up over time. And there are shrubs of all different ages and types. And if you want it tidy and neat, you got to cut the forest down, or at least the shrubs, and start from scratch. And that takes time and money. So can some things be done? Yes. Can it easily be done? Generally not. Do I see usability as becoming more of an issue? That's one of the reasons I agreed to come tonight. I think that what you folks are doing is going to come at architects and engineers from the other side and educate people that this matters and we can affect it. but it's tough. By the way, the question is, what's the difference between the process that produces a great building and a process that produces a goofball building such as we were looking at? That's not a goofball building. A lot of people would say it's a pretty good building. I showed it to you because I can point out its weaknesses. But there are a lot of people who think it's pretty good. For instance, who do you think was most responsible for that building coming into existence? President of Drexel University. Did he get what he wanted? You bet. Because it is highly visible, and it is by I learned this phrase about 2 years ago. I never heard it until I heard it from my president. A signature architect. Which reminds me of my favorite architect joke, which is the pair of hotel owners that were comparing their problems after a hurricane in Miami, and one said, how'd you come through? And the guy said, yeah, I didn't have too much problem. Everything came through all right. And, how about you? Well, some of my architecture blew off, but the building's okay. Okay. Let's one more and then we'll wrap up. In the way back.
Any of your students or any of your classes teaching game programming, basic architecture, 3D interface, you mentioned earlier, which Drexel doing what you guys doing in that area?
Are any of my students involved in game programming? No, they should be. My students are engineers. My students are responsible for making the building stand up, making the air conditioning system work. I could do a long riff on that one, but I won't. So it's not quite as important. I believe that you're dead right that there's going to be a merger and some of the most interesting things are going to come out of the gaming world. But that's not in my domain particularly. I'm going to watch it and enjoy it. And somebody's going to get clever about it. So I got to wrap up. Folks, I greatly enjoyed it. It's fun to be able to take pot shots at something that really is a pretty good building. So enjoy the break.